This is Howard Reingold, and I'm here with Will Richardson, a person I discovered when I first started teaching and was desperately looking around for some help about how you used social media. And his book on, let's see, the title of the book was How to Use Blogs, Wikis,
Podcasts and other
Podcasts.
powerful web tools for classrooms. A long
Yeah,
mouthful, I know.
and a lot of examples in that. So, Will, obviously from reading the book, you are someone who's done this in practice as a teacher, and I'd like to hear about your practice as a teacher with social media and your ideas about network literacy and personal learning networks. What are they, and how do you cultivate them?
Well, I actually started using some of these tools way back in 2002 in my high school classrooms, and mostly blogs at that time, but some wiki stuff. And it was just really interesting to see my kids putting their stuff out there for a much more public audience, and all of the kinds of challenges and opportunities that came along with that. But it really gave my classroom a much more global sense, and I think it made it more meaningful. So much of what we do in classrooms sometimes is contrived in that, at the end of the day, it's just for the teacher, it's just for the grade. And when I was able to really offer my kids more of an audience, even back then, it changed it. It really, I think, made them much more aware that their words can have an influence, that they can connect with other people. So it was really kind of fun to watch, and it's been interesting to watch over the last almost, I guess it's been 8 years now, 9 years almost, watching as more and more educators begin to, kind of figure that out, that their curriculum really needs to shift in order to take advantage of the opportunities that kids have to do real work for real audiences, and that it's not that hard to do from a technology standpoint, but that it is a little bit difficult trying to figure out, what the implications of it are, and how to best kind of tweak your curriculum, not only to get the most out of whatever the goals and objectives are that you currently have, but then to really think about how can I make this experience help my students understand more fully those interactions that they have online, and that kind of goal and objective, that kind of outcome is really cross-curricular. It's for whatever you're teaching. So it's been fun to watch and see now so many teachers out there that are beginning to do more than just explore, but really shift curriculum around the idea that kids need to be connected in a learning sense, not just a social sense.
You're talking about the entire World Wide Web when you talk about having an audience out
Yep,
there. There's
exactly.
a lot of fear about that, and in
Sure.
some cases, laws about that restricting
Yep.
access. What can you say to assure people that having the world as your audience is useful?
Well, I think, we have to draw on our own experience with that. I think that we have to become comfortable with having the world as our audience, and understand what those interactions look like for ourselves before we can make really good sense of it in our curriculum. And I think, the advantage I had, at least at that point, was that I'd been blogging for a little while, and I'd begun to experience that kind of back and forth, and that connectedness. So I was able to take my own experience and apply it to what was happening with my kids. Look, there are lots of classrooms now, lots of schools that are doing this safely, that are doing it, pretty consistently. And I just think we're at a point now where there's so many great examples to draw upon that we can make that compelling case that this is safe, and beyond that, it's necessary that we have to put our kids out there in measured ways, depending on their age and everything else. But we have to give them a sense of what these interactions look like. We have to be the adults in the room who can guide them and help them, make sense of it, because no one's teaching them right now. And that's the big issue that I have as a parent and as an educator, is that my kids certainly are going to be living in these learning spaces, and they're not getting any instruction as to how to do it really well. And most kids will be okay. Most kids will kind of navigate that space, and they are navigating that space pretty safely. But I just think there's so much that we can take advantage of, and there's so many ways that we can help our kids do even a better job in terms of learning around their passions. That as an educator and as a system, I think it's incumbent upon on us to do that.
So what do you mean by network literacy?
Well, we go back and forth in my community online as to whether these are just new skills or if they're literacies, really. And I kind of fall to the side that, this is a literacy. This is something really different, I think. It's not just reading and writing. It's connecting, and it's interacting in these spaces, both with people and with information, in ways that I think are decidedly different from offline interactions that we have. It really is about being able to understand who is it, that you're interacting with. What is the value of that person? What is the value of that piece of information? What's the agenda behind it? A lot of it is pretty good information literacy skills that we've been trying to teach kids all along. But I just think that there's there's an independence about this. There's a kind of self-directedness about this that requires more of a sophistication than simply being able to read a piece of text and get behind it and understand, where not only what it means, how it decodes, but also kind of the agenda behind it. I think this is a little bit more complex, to be honest, and that literacy in these spaces really requires more of a global understanding and of a connectedness understanding that I think we don't teach in schools when we talk about reading and writing. So for me, it really is all about how do we learn in these spaces with other people outside of our physical space in asynchronous ways, in self-directed ways, around the things that we're passionate about. That description doesn't look much like what takes place in classrooms, and I think it's a vastly different interaction on a lot of different levels.
Can you give us a couple of quick examples of the kind of assignments that students do that really lead them to have this kind of connectedness
Sure.
feeling?
Yeah, I think one of my favorites of late is a Spanish teacher who's actually here locally at my old school. His name's John Pennington, and what he's been able to do is approach his kids at the beginning of the year and say, look, we're going to learn Spanish, and you're going to learn Spanish in the context of whatever it is that you really love, whatever your passion is. And so he has kids basically identifying, what's the subject area or what's the interest area that they want to learn Spanish, using. And for instance, one girl wanted to learn Spanish because in the context of fashion design, she wanted to be a fashion designer. So he takes them through a process where, for instance, that girl goes and finds a Spanish-speaking blogger on fashion design, begins to read that particular blog, interact on that blog, and then in this particular case, the woman who in Spain, it turned out, didn't speak English, so she began to learn English from the student here in New Jersey, while the student in New Jersey was learning Spanish from her, and they were doing it back and forth again in a conversation about fashion design, which led to a number of other connections for this girl, and that's the type of I think assignment, if you want to call it that, or that's the type of environment for a classroom that I think is really powerful right now, because what John's been willing to do is pretty much step aside and guide his students to find their own teachers and to be able to vet those teachers, be able to interact with those people, to understand all about safety and ethics in that process, and to make his classroom a global classroom. He's really made it transparent, and it's not without difficulty. It's not without challenges. I mean, there've been some conversations that have been kind of interesting with parents and other teachers. But, at the end of the day, I think, again, because he is a part of the network, because he participates in these spaces, can make a pretty compelling case that this is the way that learning looks in many ways now for the kids in his classroom. And for them not to get some sense of what that looks like and acts like, I think is, again, not preparing them for what they're eventually going to be faced with.
What do you mean by the term personal learning network? How would you describe a personal learning network?
Well, it's different from community. I think a lot of people are talking about professional learning communities and professional learning networks, and I do think there's a difference. And Cheryl Nussbaum Beach, she and I have been doing a lot of work around professional development, and we kind of distinguish the two in that, networks are connections that we have to people or resources or whatever that gives us information back that maybe we interact with on some kind of impersonal level that we share or exchange ideas. But community is really a little bit different when we kind of get together and roll up our sleeves and start acting in concert for some bigger goal, whether it's in our case, to help a whole group of teachers get a better understanding of the context shift and the personal learning shift and the professional learning shift that goes along with this, or whether it's, a group of environmentalists or whatever else. So for me, the network is really important. And it's probably where I spend most of my time is on those kind of more informal interactions where I'm, looking for information or exchanging information, sharing with people, and having that kind of group of people at my fingertips almost. I think Twitter is a great example of a network type of tool. That can turn into a community type of tool, but mostly I think I use it as a network space where I reach out to people and make connections.
Tips on building or growing a personal learning network, whether you're talking to an educator or a student. How do you get started? What do you do?
Well, I think the most important thing these days is just to identify your passion and to make sure that you're learning about something that you love to learn about, that you really are motivated to find the best teachers, to find the best information, and to pull that stuff in and make that a part of your kind of daily learning curriculum. I think, from a tool standpoint, I think most people would probably agree that Twitter's probably the easiest place to start these days because it doesn't require a lot of time necessarily. It doesn't require even a lot of real heavy-duty thinking. It's not like blogging, which at times, requires some intellectual sweat in order to make a great blog post. But there are a lot of people out there on Twitter who are willing to share ideas, share resources. There's some pretty easy ways of finding groups of those people that again, share your passions. So, that's I think a great launching pad for an exploration into these personal learning networks. But I do think that it has to go beyond that at some point. I think great bloggers are important people who are really taking the time to think through their ideas and to synthesize all those kinds of patterns or pieces of thinking or ideas that are out there. So Twitter's a great place to start, but there's lots of different places to go after that. And the great thing about the web right now is that there's no passion that you can't find other people to connect with around. That's the really cool part.
So I think a lot of people agree that collaboration is an important skill, and of course wikis are an easily available tool for collaboration, but it turns out not to be so easy to teach collaboration. That's not really what a lot of students are learning to do. Do you have a couple of quick examples of using wikis with students to encourage collaborative work?
Well, it kind of runs the gamut, and you can find a lot of examples where teachers are employing wikis for kids to create kind of glossaries and create source books or whatever else. I know I did that back when I was teaching my media studies class as well, and that's not really collaboration, I don't think, as much as it is kind of collection of ideas. Sure, they're kind of working together to create something. But I think, when we talk about collaboration, again, I think that goes back more towards the conversation around communities again. And, let's build something together. Let's build something meaningful together where everybody wants to take part in it and everyone has a passion to participate in that. I know that, the things that Vicki Davis has been doing with the Flat Classrooms projects, the wikis that her kids have made, I think that those are collaborative pieces where they're trying to make sense of the world. They're trying to bring other viewpoints and other people into that process and build something that is more than kind of just a reference. It's kind of a living document. And it's hard. You're right. It is really hard. I think in many ways the system discourages collaboration. We've set it up as almost a competition in classrooms, and it's sometimes difficult to break that structure and really make kids see the value in sharing and in working with one another to create something meaningful. So there are examples out there, but like you suggest, it's not it's not necessarily an easy process to put together for kids.
Okay, any last words of advice to other teachers out there about getting started with using social media in teaching?
Yeah, I'll just leave it with what I always say to teachers, and that is start with yourselves. You know, I mean, it's important, really important to understand the implications of these types of connections and these types of technologies for yourself. And if you can, again, find your passion and begin to learn and connect around those ideas, it makes it a lot easier to make great decisions about curriculum and about, you know, practice in the classroom, because you'll have that personal context and that personal experience around it. But it's a great place to be. It's an amazing time to be a learner, and we should definitely be thinking about how we share this with our kids in meaningful ways.
Thanks a lot, Will.
Appreciate it, Howard.